Faith is believing in something you can't see, you can't feel, something that can't be proven.
Then how do you know which is the right faith?
I think that's a gut thing.
I don't think about a right faith. I think about what resonates with me. I feel authentic. It brings me peace.
I think there is no absolute truth in any religion. I think it's a matter of subjective experience.
I kind of just trust my intuition, trust my gut.
You just know. You just gotta follow it.
You just gotta follow what you think is your faith.
If faith is blind, then what makes one belief better or worse than any other? And if it's just a leap in the dark, why should any of us feel obligated to believe anything at all? My name is Shane Rosenthal. I was raised in a Jewish home but became an atheist at a very young age. Later, as I began to question things, I ended up losing faith in my atheism and converted to Christianity. Since that time, I've never stopped asking questions, and I've spoken with authors and scholars from all over the world in order to explore the beliefs and ideas that shape our lives. Over the years, one thing I've concluded is this: we're all believers. But because there are so many conflicting ideas and worldviews out there, we just can't all be right. So how do we find the truth? On this podcast, we'll start by asking questions.
I'm really just trying to figure out what I believe right now.
Hey there, welcome to another episode of the Humble Skeptic Podcast. I'm Shane Rosenthal, and on this episode, I'll be exploring some of the messianic prophecies that we find in the book of Daniel. As I discussed on the Babylon episode, Daniel chapter 2 tells of a dream that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had of a great idolatrous statue made of 4 different metals. When a stone cut by no human hand struck the feet of the statue, it shattered the image and broke it to pieces. Then we're told that the stone grew to become a great mountain that filled the entire earth. In his interpretation of the dream, Daniel told Nebuchadnezzar, quote, "You are the head of gold, and another kingdom inferior to yours shall arise after you, as well as a third kingdom of bronze, and a fourth kingdom strong as iron. And in the days of the kings of that fourth kingdom, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed. It shall break into pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever." Most commentators agree that the 4 parts of the statue refer to the successive kingdoms of Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome, and the rock cut by no human hand, which became a mountain that filled the earth, represents the kingdom of Christ. As I mentioned back on episode 66, most scholars agree that Daniel 7 tells the same story we find in chapter 2, but with completely different imagery. In chapter 7, Daniel describes 4 great beasts that emerge from the sea, which are then explained to represent 4 successive kingdoms. The 4th beast, we're told, represents a kingdom that will be different from all the kingdoms and will devour the entire earth. Scholars agree that this is parallel to the 4th and final section of the great statue in Daniel 2, which represents the Roman Empire. The 10 horns of the terrifying beast represent 10 individual kings of that 4th kingdom, just as the 10 toes of the statue were also identified as kings. Quote, "In the days of those kings," we're told in Daniel 2:44, "the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed." Now, as Daniel was considering the 10 horns of the 4th beast, he says, quote, "There came up among them another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots." Suddenly, the scene changes and we're given a glimpse of God's courtroom in heaven. In verses 13 and 14, Daniel says that he saw with the clouds of heaven one like a son of man, who came before the Ancient of Days and was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom is one that shall never be destroyed. Daniel Boyarin is a fascinating scholar who writes about this scene from Daniel chapter 7 in his book, The Jewish Gospels. Boyarin is professor of Talmud at the University of Berkeley, and commenting on this chapter, he says, quote, "In this remarkable text, there are two divine figures. One is depicted as the Ancient of Days sitting on the throne, along with a second divine figure who is in form like a human being, and who will be given eternal dominion of the entire world." Listing the characteristics of this Son of Man figure, Boyarin says, quote, "He is divine. He is in human form. He may very well be portrayed as a younger appearing divinity than the Ancient of Days. He will be enthroned on high, and he is given power and dominion." He then concludes by saying that, quote, "All these are characteristics of Jesus. It is no wonder, then, that many Jews believed he was precisely the one they were expecting. Some Jews had been expecting this Redeemer to be a human exalted to the state of divinity, while others were expecting a divinity to come down to earth and take on human form. Either way, we end up with a double Godhead and a human-divine combination as the expected Redeemer. In short, the Messiah existed as a Jewish idea long before the baby Jesus was born in Nazareth. The idea of a second God as viceroy to God the Father is one of the oldest theological ideas in Israel, and the theology of the Gospels, far from being a radical innovation, is a highly conservative return to the most ancient moments within that tradition. Some years ago, I invited Dr. Boyarin to join me for an interview, and here's a clip from that conversation.
There's been a certain kind of so-called liberal theology that has wanted since the 19th century to reconstruct the very kind of rationalistic image of who Jesus was, right? Itinerant preacher, provocative teacher. My point being that liberal tradition insists that the accretion of divinity and second personhood and incarnation, etc., is under the impact of Greek ideas later than the first century at any rate. And I suggest that actually what we call today high Christology, namely the notion of Jesus as divine human, was there from the very beginning. And it was there from the very beginning precisely because it answered to a major spiritual tendency within the Jewish spirituality of the day.
You talk in your book about the fact that modern Bible readers tend to think of the phrase Son of God as a reference to Christ's divinity, whereas Son of Man points to his humanity. But you say that almost the exact opposite was the case. Can you explain that point for our listeners?
Yes. We see very clearly in the Psalms and some of the prophetic texts that the king of Israel was called the Son of God. There are many examples. Now, the Messiah as Son of God means the restoration of the once and future true kingship, right? So when the Messiah is referred to as Son of God, that indicates that he is the true king of Israel. Son of Man, on the other hand, many, if not most scholars agree, comes from Daniel 7, where Daniel sees a vision, and in his vision he sees two clearly divine figures, one Atik Yomin, that is one Ancient of Days, and another one like unto a Son of Man. Now, Son of Man in Aramaic there just means a human being. That's true. But when you see a divine figure like unto a Son of Man, that means his appearance is as a young human. But he's clearly a divine figure there because he comes riding on the clouds.
And his kingdom is eternal.
And his kingdom is eternal, right?
Do you think that there is a new appreciation for the Jewishness of both Jesus and the New Testament as a whole in modern New Testament scholarship?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Not universal, of course. I mean, we still get some pretty sharply anti-Judaic formulations from some very prominent New Testament scholars whose names I will not mention. But there's a strong movement within New Testament scholarship to pay close attention to the deep Jewishness of the Gospels and of Paul as well.
Even as far back as Daniel's day, these beliefs about the Messiah weren't believed to be radical new innovations. Some 500 years earlier from that time, the people of Israel sang the words of Psalm 45, which included these words, quote, "Your throne, O God, is forever and ever. You have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness." If that last part sounds strange to you, I assure you that it's even stranger in the original Hebrew, where there are literally two Elohims in this one passage. One is the Elohim being anointed, while the other is the Elohim doing the anointing. And since in Hebrew the verb to anoint is Mashiach, which happens to be the root of our English word Messiah, this is an incredibly important passage that informs us of ancient messianic beliefs from the period around 1000 BC. This passage from Psalm 45 is similar in many ways to the message of Psalm 2, which says, quote, "The kings of the earth set themselves against the Lord and his anointed. The Lord said to me, 'You are my son, today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, and the ends of the earth your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron, and dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Therefore, O kings, be wise. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry and you perish in the way. Blessed are all who take refuge in him." After reading this material, it seems clear that the message we find in the Psalms is identical to the imagery provided later by the prophet Daniel. God's anointed Messiah is the one who shatters rival kingdoms and who makes the ends of the earth his own possession. He's the stone cut by no human hand that shatters rival empires and grows to become an ever-expanding mountain. And he's the Son of Man who appears before the Ancient of Days and receives a kingdom that will never be destroyed. In his commentary on Daniel 7, John Calvin noted that some interpreters in his day ended up twisting the meaning of the four beasts that came up out of the sea, arguing that they referred to power structures of that period, such as the Roman papacy, or even of invading Turks. Calvin dismissed these views, saying, quote, "They are both wrong, since they think the entire course of Christ's kingdom is here described, while God wished only to declare what should happen up to the first advent of Christ. When Daniel says the 10 horns of the fourth beast are 10 kings which will arise, we have demonstrated how unintelligible this prophecy becomes unless we relate it to the Caesars." Writing about the time of Emperor Nero and the other Caesars who followed after him, historian Philip Schaff observes that, quote, "After Nero killed himself, the emperors Galba, Otho, and Vitellius followed one another in rapid succession, until Vespasian in the year 69 AD was universally proclaimed Emperor of Rome." A 4th century Christian historian by the name of Sulpicius Severus said of Vespasian's rise to power, quote, "While he was besieging Jerusalem, Vespasian took possession of the imperial power and was saluted as emperor by the army, with a diadem placed upon his head. He also made his son Titus Caesar and assigned him a portion of the forces, along with the task of continuing the siege of Jerusalem." The fact that Titus ended up becoming prince of the Roman Empire and co-regent with his father, in my opinion, fits remarkably well with the imagery described by Daniel in chapter 7 of his prophecy. Recall again that in verse 8, Daniel tells us that as he was considering the 10 horns, he noticed a little horn come up among them. Now, if the beast refers to the Roman Empire, and the horns refer to individual Caesars, then counting from Julius Caesar, Vespasian would be the 10th horn, which in my opinion makes Titus an excellent candidate to be the little horn of Daniel's prophecy, since he's the son of Emperor Vespasian, and thus the prince of the Roman Empire. It's interesting to me that Vespasian and Titus came to power immediately following the defeat of Galba, Otho, and Vitellius in the span of less than 1 year, since in my thinking this fits with another element of Daniel's prophecy. As I considered the horns, Daniel says, there came up among them a little horn, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. So if we're correct in saying that Vespasian is the 10th horn and his son Titus the little horn, then perhaps Galba, Otho, and Vitellius can be identified as the 3 horns that were plucked up immediately before them. In verses 19 and following of chapter 7, Daniel writes this: I desire to know the truth about the 4th beast, the 10 horns upon its head, and the other horn that came up, and before which 3 of them fell. As I looked, this horn made war with the saints, and prevailed over them. They shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. Most commentators agree that Daniel's reference there to a time, times, and half a time refers to a period of 3.5 years, which, as it happens, also corresponds to the timing of the Jewish war that culminated in the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Listen once again to the words of Sulpicius Severus. Once Vespasian was declared emperor, he made his son Titus Caesar and assigned him a portion of the forces along with the task of continuing the siege of Jerusalem. In my opinion, these things fit with incredible precision. Another important section of Daniel's prophecy seems to confirm this. This passage, found in chapter 9, also relates to the destruction of Jerusalem and its sacred temple. Starting at verse 24, Daniel was told that, quote, 70 weeks are decreed about your people and your holy city, to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to fulfill vision and prophecy, and to anoint a holy of holies. Know therefore and understand that from the issuing of the decree to restore and build Jerusalem until the anointed prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The plaza and wall shall be rebuilt even in troubled times. After 62 weeks the anointed one shall be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince to come shall destroy the city and sanctuary. Its end shall be with a flood, and to the end of the war, desolations are decreed. And he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, and for a half the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abominations shall come one who makes desolate, until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in the middle part of the last century, it became clear that at least some Jews before the time of Jesus interpreted Daniel 9 in messianic directions. One scroll in particular, written around a century before Christ's birth, connected this important passage to the Jewish understanding of the year of Jubilee. According to Leviticus 25:8, the Jubilee was calculated by counting 7 weeks of years, or 7 times 7 years. At the end of this 49-year period, liberty was proclaimed and all debts were removed. Many scholars discuss the way this background helps us to understand chapter 9 of Daniel's prophecy. Since 70 times 7 years comes to a total of 490, it has been seen by many thinkers as a kind of ultimate jubilee, which is precisely what was affirmed in the ancient scroll discovered at Qumran. Speaking of the Messiah, this Dead Sea Scroll says, quote, "He will proclaim to them the Jubilee, thereby releasing them from the debt of all their sins. The Day of Atonement shall follow at the end of the 10th Jubilee, when he shall atone for all the sons of light. The messenger is the anointed of the Spirit, of whom Daniel spoke, saying, After the 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off." This remarkable passage is just a small portion of what has come to be known as the Melchizedek Scroll. It's referred to by this name since the author repeatedly uses the name Melchizedek to refer to Israel's coming Messiah. Some years ago, I invited respected New Testament scholar Craig Evans to record an interview about this fascinating scroll, and here's a clip from that conversation.
The Melchizedek scroll was found in cave number 11, and this was one of the last scrolls to be published. Well, there were about 15 or so fragments to this scroll, and it took scholars a number of years to piece them together. And what we have are 3 columns of text, and it's the second column that's mostly preserved. And it is exciting. There's this vision that somebody will come and announce the Jubilee, a forgiveness of debts in the future. And who's going to bring this about? Someone called Melchizedek. And so this strange Melchizedek figure, who's mentioned in Psalm 110, where God will raise up his king and let him sit at his right hand. And oh, by the way, you'll be a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. It's a very mysterious tradition. And the author of Hebrews in the New Testament runs with it and says, it's actually Jesus. He's the one who's this Melchizedek, who's both priest and king, who serves at God's, sits at his right hand and mediates, serves as high priest for his people forever. Well, you know, the men at Qumran seem to have a similar idea. The Melchizedek figure of the document we're talking about from Cave 11, he defeats Satan. He forgives God's people their sins. He restores them. In fact, in a certain sense, he's God himself. That, for me, is the most exciting part. We actually know this because the 11Q Melchizedek text quotes Isaiah 61:2, which in the Hebrew it says, to declare the acceptable year of Yahweh, the Lord. But in the paraphrase, it says to declare the acceptable year of Melchizedek. That's amazing. Then it goes on to say, to defend that, oh yes, he sits with all the holy ones. He sits with the very angels in the heavenly court, and starts quoting some verses from the Psalm. And so whoever this figure is, he's God in the flesh who comes to Israel and defeats Satan, forgives sin, and restores and heals his own people. And you can see why, my goodness, if there were ideas circulating in the first century, as evidently there were, about this Melchizedek figure, no wonder the author of Hebrews sees this fulfilled in the ministry of Jesus.
In addition to Daniel 9, the author of the Melchizedek Scroll also quotes and interacts with passages related to the suffering servant prophecy found in Isaiah 52 and 53. This is likely due to the fact that in both passages the individual is cut off as an atonement for sin. Here's the way that Isaiah puts it. He was cut off out of the land of the living, stricken for the transgression of my people. And they made his grave with the wicked and with a rich man in his death, although he had done no violence. What's particularly fascinating about Daniel 9 is that the anointed prince who comes to atone for iniquity and bring in everlasting righteousness ends up being contrasted with another prince who later comes to destroy Jerusalem and its sacred temple. Listen again to verse 26 of Daniel 9. After 62 weeks, the anointed one shall be cut off, but not for himself, and the people of the prince to come shall destroy the city and sanctuary. As I mentioned earlier, we already know the name of the prince who sacked Jerusalem in 70 AD. The Roman general in charge of the campaign against Jerusalem was Titus, the son of Emperor Vespasian and prince of the Roman Empire. Reflecting on the accuracy of Daniel's prophecies, the Jewish historian Josephus says, quote, "Daniel wrote about the empire of the Romans and that our nation should be laid waste by them." In his book, The Son of Man, Richard Bauckham argues that this comment by Josephus is an unmistakable reference to Daniel 9. I agree with that conclusion, particularly in light of the fact that Josephus also went on to praise Daniel, since he not only spoke of future events, but also determined the time of their accomplishment. The clearest example of this, in my opinion, is his prophecy of the ultimate Jubilee in chapter 9. Daniel's prophecy of the 70 weeks appears to be broken up into 3 distinct parts: 7 weeks, 62 weeks, and 1 final week. The 7 weeks of the first section amounts to a period of 49 years and relates to the rebuilding of the Second Temple, which according to Ezra and Nehemiah, did take place in troubled times. After a period of an additional 62 weeks, or 434 years, the Messianic Prince comes to his people and is officially anointed, which I end up connecting to Jesus' baptism at the beginning of his 3-year ministry. According to Daniel, the Messiah is cut off in the middle of that 7-year period, which I believe refers to Jesus' crucifixion and death. The remainder of that 7-year period would then relate to the post-resurrection appearances of Jesus, to the commissioning of the Apostle Paul a few years later, and the establishment of the church in Jerusalem. A careful study of Daniel 9 reveals that the destruction of Jerusalem occurs sometime after the 70 weeks prophecy has already been fulfilled by the work of Israel's Messiah. As we've seen in verse 26, the work of the Messianic Prince appears to be juxtaposed with the Prince of the people, who comes to destroy the city. Listen again to this part of Daniel's prophecy. After the 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off. That's referring to Jesus' death. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city, a reference to Titus. Here's verse 27. He shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, and for half a week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering, a clear reference to Jesus. And on the wing of abominations shall come one who makes desolate, another clear reference to Titus. When this prophecy is read alongside Daniel chapter 7, it becomes increasingly clear that Titus is the little horn who made war with the saints and prevailed over them for a time, times, and half a time. As I mentioned, this relates to the 3.5-year period of the Jewish war that culminated in the destruction of Jerusalem. Whether or not any of this sounds plausible to you likely relates to your current views related to the end times, or what scholars refer to as eschatology. But the question I'd like you to consider is whether we should allow our current views and perspectives to dictate the interpretation of very clear texts. In my thinking, it should be the other way around. We should allow the very clear passages that we've been studying to construct our view of eschatology. This also requires what I refer to as a humble skepticism, in which we're willing to challenge ourselves and our own convictions, continually asking, have I got this right? I'm convinced that Calvin was onto something when he suggested that the prophecies of Daniel essentially become unintelligible when applied to things still off in the distant future. Many interpreters who argue that Daniel's little horn refers to the Antichrist of a future end-time period are only able to arrive at that conclusion by inserting a pause of over 2,000 years, nowhere mentioned by Daniel, before the final 70th week of his prophecy. Many of these same scholars also suggest that before the Antichrist appears and ushers in the last days, the Jerusalem temple needs to be rebuilt once again, since according to Daniel, it's something he destroys. But as we've seen, Josephus himself believed that the destruction of Jerusalem by Titus was predicted by Daniel, which means that he interpreted the 70 weeks prophecy of Daniel 9 as being fulfilled in his own time. If it's possible to interpret his prophecy of 70 weeks as being fulfilled not in a period of 490 years, but rather to sometime well over 2,500 years later, then his words can be interpreted to mean almost anything. When Daniel tells us in verse 21 of chapter 7 that the little horn made war with the saints, I believe this is parallel to what we find in chapter 9 as the prince of the people comes to destroy the city and sanctuary. In verse 25 of chapter 7, we're also told that the little horn ends up changing the times and the law, which in my view relates to the official termination of the Mosaic era. Since the Jerusalem temple was the only place authorized for sacrifice, its destruction meant that all the Mosaic rites related to ritual purification and sacrifice could no longer be carried out, which required a complete transformation of Jewish life and practice. Ultimately, the reason the law had to be changed was that the Messianic Prince himself had already come and put an end to sacrifice at the time he was cut off and ratified a new covenant, just as Daniel predicted. Commenting on Daniel 9, Eusebius of Caesarea argued that this prophecy makes clear that Jerusalem would be destroyed, the worship of the Mosaic law would be taken away from it, and another new covenant with humanity introduced in its place. All of this relates to something the prophet Jeremiah wrote about in chapter 31 of his prophecy. "Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. This covenant," he says, "will not be like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant that they broke, though I was their husband. This is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days. I will put my law within them and write it on their hearts. I will forgive their iniquity," he says, "and remember their sins no more." On the night in which he was betrayed, Jesus held a cup of Passover wine and told his disciples, quote, "This cup that is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood." Just as Jeremiah and Daniel had declared centuries earlier, a new covenant was inaugurated in the days of the Messiah. In speaking of a new covenant, writes the author to the Hebrews, he makes the first one obsolete. And what is becoming obsolete and growing old is ready to pass away. That was written while priests continued to serve at the Jerusalem temple, and I argue that the Old Covenant officially expired in 70 AD when the temple was destroyed. As we've seen throughout this episode, the prophecies of Daniel ultimately point to the work of Israel's coming Messianic prince. In chapter 2, we're told of a rock cut by no human hand that strikes the great statue on its feet and toes. As noted, that fourth section of the statue related to the Roman Empire. In the days of those kings, Daniel wrote, referring to the 10 toes on the feet of the statue, God will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. Chapter 7 says the same thing with different images. Instead of a statue made of 4 metals, Daniel described 4 beasts that came up out of the sea. And as he was considering the 4th beast with its 10 horns, he was shown a vision of the Son of Man, who came before the Ancient of Days and received a kingdom that shall never be destroyed. Daniel 7 also describes a little horn that fits remarkably well with what we know of Titus, particularly since he was the destroyer of Jerusalem and the prince of the Roman Empire. Since we're told that the 10 horns refer to the first 10 kings of that 4th kingdom, it makes sense that a prince would be described as a little horn. And finally, when we see the very clear and deliberate contrast between 2 princes in chapter 9, that is, the Messianic prince, son of the Most High, and the prince of the people to come who destroys the city and sanctuary, it becomes clear that Titus is being presented as a kind of Antichrist figure, and whether or not he is merely a type of another Antichrist still yet to come is an entirely separate question. Now, before I wrap up, if you're interested in connecting some of the prophecies we've been studying in Daniel with similar themes and ideas that appear in the book of Revelation, I recently wrote an article titled Deciphering the Clues of Revelation that I'll be sure to link in the show notes. I'm also working on a larger PDF resource related to this issue that I'll be making available soon to my donors and subscribers, complete with a number of charts that will hopefully help to make some of these concepts more accessible. If you're interested in joining me for a weekend conference in order to take an in-depth look at Christ's fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy, I'll be giving a number of talks on that subject in the Memphis area on April 11th through the 13th, and you can find more information about that in the show notes, along with other upcoming events, including a Christian and Muslim conversation that I'll be participating in here in the St. Louis area later that month. If you're a fan of the show, please share episodes with friends and family and consider upgrading to a paid subscription. For more information about anything you've heard on this episode, the web address is humbleskeptic.com. That's humbleskeptic.com. And I look forward to being with you again next time as we discuss the beliefs and ideas that shape our lives.